Thank you. Hello, everybody, and good morning. When I counted up the age of everybody up here on this panel, it was only a few thousand years. I think we only went back to the Cenozoic period, but maybe in rock terms, it's more like the Rolling Stones, maybe. But I'm going to introduce the panel, and I'm going to do a little extended version of the history of each person up here, because it's like the history of the whole industry. We are the panel that are the panel of veterans. This morning you heard from the first-timers. We're not the old-timers, but we have seen it all. I think it goes everywhere from 22 years up to over 45 years of experience up here with the people that are here. So I'm going to begin with, not that he's the oldest, but he has the most experience, and that's Greg. Greg has been in the film business for over 50 years, probably 55 years. He started in surfing, and those of us from Southern California might know his surfing movies, especially 5 Summer Stories. It's a cult. Greg really created a cult in surfing movies. And then he went to Hollywood, and he worked with Stanley Kubrick, among others, worked on The Shining. And if you ever want some great stories, ask Greg about Stanley Kubrick. It is really interesting. But then he got into the giant screen world and the IMAX world, really almost from the very beginning. To Fly, of course, was the first film. That opened in 1976 at the National Air and Space Museum, and that was number 4. There were only 4 theaters in the world back then. And To Fly really pretty much introduced the format to the world. That film is played there every day for 43 years. That is a long time. It must be the longest running documentary. It's such a special film that the Library of Congress put it into their archives as one of the 100 most important films of the 20th century, along with Citizen Kane, Gone with the Wind. So that To Fly is really a special film. But Greg has made probably 42 giant screen films, 43 in the past 43 years. Everest, to the Arctic, National Parks Adventure. I think you probably know a lot of the films. In 2002, the GSCA honored Greg with one of the 5 most important contributors to the success of the giant screen industry. So he's really been around. Today we want to hear about the longevity, what it takes to be successful all those years. So be thinking of your questions for Greg. Mark Katz is next. 31 years he's come along. We call Mark the Forrest Gump of the distribution world, because he has been in 6 different distribution companies. Like I told you, just the history of distribution. He started out with the IMAX Corporation. Then he had a short stint at MacGillivray Freeman. Then he went to Sony Pictures Classics, and that's when Mark and I kind of bonded. I was at the Sony theaters back then, and Sony was doing theaters and films, and it was really exciting. And I'll never forget, Mark's boss came to me one day and said, "Mary Jane, does Mark really have to go one by one and travel to all these theaters to make a deal?" Yes, he does. Then he went to N-Wave, where there's a lot of innovative and animation going on in 3D. And then he was president of distribution for Nat Geo Studios, where there was a lot of innovative things happening there. And now he's senior vice president in distribution of theater development for the giant screen films and D3D Cinema. So thank you, Mark. John Wickstrom, 25 years.
28.
Oh, 28. Oh, sorry. I can't keep up. He's also worked in a lot of distribution films, but he actually started out as an exhibitor with the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. So I think you're going to see a lot of crossover on this panel, exhibition, distribution, production, for those 3 different perspectives. In Chicago, he worked as a distributor of Antarctica, but also executive producer of the film Solar Max. And then he moved on he worked with N-Wave for a while, National Geographic as well. And now he's vice president, film distribution of Cosmic Picture. Thank you. I was going to steal John's, when I was talking to him, he had a really funny line. He goes, being in the industry is like Back to the Future, you can't get out.
Run!
Mark Bretherton, 22 years. He is from Australia. He was now as head of distribution at December Media Distribution for the past 2 years. But for 20 years, he worked in exhibition operating, marketing, programming for 5 to 6 theaters, including Melbourne and Sydney. The Sydney Theatre opened in 1996, and I followed him a lot during that time because I was at Sony at the time, and it was a standalone commercial theater, very successful, but he had the biggest bragging rights on earth, and I was so jealous. He had the largest screen in the world, and he used it to the max. And I remember at Sony, when Peter Guber found out that the Sony Theater was not the largest screen in the world, he goes, "Raise the roof, we gotta get the screen bigger." We didn't do that. So Mark remained the biggest screen in the world, but Mark's gonna be talking from his perspective of exhibition, because he did both commercial films and documentary films. And the difference between those two audiences is really interesting. And the way he markets, I wanted him to talk about his marketing today too, because it's so important to find that balance of marketing the format, the giant screen, with the film. And he's won a lot of Mac Awards that caught my attention, so he'll be talking about that. Speaking of amazing marketing, Julie has been 23 years in the industry. Julie's from Montreal, and when the theater there started, I didn't know this, it was a standalone commercial theater. And so in 2000, she was part of the team that had the whole transition into an educational-based institution at the Old Port. Now she's the head of strategic development activities and business initiatives and sponsorships at the IMAX Telus Theatre at Montreal Science Centre. She also does work with the foundation and the Old Port. So we're really great to have all these panelists today. And so you're going to hear 3 different perspectives: exhibition, distribution, and production, as we talk about the audience. One of the things we want to do today is talk about the change. How has the audience changed? What have been the big things that changed our industry? And I have a little chart here that I got the source material from LF Examiner. This is, you can see one of the big changes is the number of theaters. We started in 1971. There was one theater. That was Ontario Place in Toronto. In 1976, the National Air and Space was number 4. There were 6 theaters, thank you. But you can see it took a long time to really take off. And it was really, we reached the peak probably 2000. For the brown line there are the institutional theaters. The turquoise line are the multiplex. So you can see like around 2000 and really in 2010, you see a gigantic spike in the number of theaters. This affected our industry in a really big way. And we'll be talking about that a little bit today. And just so you can see where our panelists fit along this timeline, there's Greg. Greg started in the very beginning, 1970. That's a young Greg, 1976. With hair. I came along in 1980 with the Hutchinson, Kansas Theater. Mark Katz came along, 1988. John Wickstrom, I guess 1993.
1991.
1991. Mark Bretherton, 1996. And I just found out today, I thought, Julie, you were the youngest on our panel, but she was really 1995. So you can see we all came right along with the evolution of the whole industry in that giant change. Again, these are the theaters. Of course, another big change was the number of films coming out. This is a list of how the films developed over the years. 1971, there was one film, North of Superior. And then there were several films that came out in those early days. So I have a list here, but I think a lot of us remember the films. Ocean, 1977, the San Diego Theater created. Genesis, 1978. These were films from the Science Museum of Minnesota and San Diego that first came up. I remember running Nomads of the Deep, which came out in 1970. Oh, there's David back there. He knows Nomads, and Tony Myers was involved in that film. That was a 20-minute film. So, back then when you were running a theater, you took pretty much whatever film was available because you didn't have a lot of options. No Beds of the Deep was only 20 minutes. It was so good. So in my theater in Hutchinson, we did these multimedia shows to kind of fill in so we could still get up to at least probably a 40-minute film. So in the early days, the exhibitors and the theaters really, and the filmmakers worked together. We were just explaining to everybody what this format was, the giant screen. And I remember with the marketing, we sold the format. We had to explain to people the giant screen. If I said this once, I said it a million times. IMAX is the largest film format in history. The frame is 10 times larger than 35 millimeter film. And I would tell everybody, and the sound would just make your diaphragm vibrate. And, I was a little excited back then. And, not that I am now, but, I would tell people, this is the biggest and the best thing in town. And this editor, he was reviewing the film To Fly, and he put it on the front page, biggest and the best, and this is, oh my God, you're not going to believe you're going to be flying. And he came to me later, and he goes, gee, maybe I overdid it, and he goes, oh, I can't imagine where you got that from. But those days were really, really so much fun. We were discovering so much back then, what worked, and today we're going to talk a little bit about that, but the focus today is on the audience and how the audience has changed. We started out with a family audience, but the family itself has changed a little bit over the years too. So I'm going to start with ask the exhibitors to talk about it, and Julie has just done some very interesting research on the audience. So Julie, let's talk about the audience.
You want to put the slide on?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning. So we do. Can you hear? Okay. We do a lot of research. I'm going to share some slides with you. You can take notes, but I don't want these slides to be published, please. Because like I say, we do a lot of research and we have a lot of competition in Montreal. So I want to keep those slides for this group. First of all, we are located, like Mary Jane said, in Montreal. We're in the old port of Montreal. You can see where we are in our beautiful city. So the Science Centre is part of the old port, which is over a mile long, and there's about 8 million people per year. So I can hear you say, wow, they must have a great attendance. It's not easy when you have competition with a Cirque du Soleil and about 100 activities per year. You have to really stand out. So I'll tell you this is our Science Centre. Who's our audience? Who comes to the theater? First of all, we have about 25 to 28% of groups, all groups, school groups, tourists, but it's less than 20% of revenues, and that's important. Mostly, I would say at least 80% are age in between 6 and 12. Why? Because when they get to high school, it's very difficult for a teacher to take a group to the theater because they have different teachers. So either all the school comes and it's full of bus, or they don't come. Well, when they're younger, they just fill a bus and there they are, they come. We have a new audience that we started targeting to, is 3 to 5 years old. We opened the theater earlier. We play a 20 minutes film. Sound is lower. Little light in the theater, and then it's tie-in with an exhibition for them, and we make sure they're gone before the teenagers are in. And we started with 1 morning per week, and then we have to open up to 2 mornings per week. And what's the challenge is that pricing has to be under $10 because that's the budget they have. So it's working pretty well. We don't buy or lease different films. When we license a film for general public, we ask if they have the 20 minutes version. And if I can give you a cue, if you're going to be doing a 20 minutes version, make sure there's no scary scenes in that 20 minutes version. No shark coming up, or they're 3 to 5 years old. So we're seeing that it's expanding. So in terms of general public, this is a slide. You won't be surprised to see that's mostly female than male, and highly educated. household income pretty high too. They like to see educational films. And what's interesting is where they come from, the Greater Montreal. They're not tourists. If you look at the slide, even the green, can you see, oh, it's green on my page. So the, yeah, the green is 7%. It's not far from Montreal. It's a one-day trip. So all the tourists come to the Old Port of Montreal, but 91% of our clients in the Old Port of Montreal are people for Greater Montreal. And we've seen the trend change over the past years because we're not so unique. You have an IMAX theater or a large format theater around your city. So when you're a tourist, you want to see something else than a large format film. So it means that we're really in competition into other attractions. And what we found out is that our customers are not huge regular cinema consumers. They're more into cultural activities and things like that. We're not really competing against commercial theaters. In terms of age, you can see that it's pretty spread out, and I'll show you on the other side later on how it's really defines. But what I want to point out is language. We're not that unique, but we're unique. Most of the population speaks French. So when it comes to versioning, some film producers hate me, but we really, really want quality because our customers, when they see a film, for example, when I see a commercial film, I don't want to hear Tom Hanks being translated. I want to hear in the original version. When it comes to documentary, I want to hear it in my own language. I want to really make sure I absorb all the information. And the sound and it's so important in the large format experience that I don't want to hear a voiceover. I don't want to see subtitle. So it's really a challenge for us, and we really had focus over the years on the quality we're presenting, and that helped us from competition. So next slide. That's pretty interesting. 12% of people attend alone. 54%, it's either with friends or just with and couples. And then it comes out with 57% family. So when it comes to choosing a film, we try to aim for all the public. So usually adults will like cutie animal films that family like, but not the opposite. So I think we'll talk later on about programming, but we always keep that in mind when we do programming. Next slide.
Is there overlap between a couple of things with children? We got 120.
Yes, yes. So when they ask him, like, in the past years, when you came, some says, oh, I came with at least a child, and also, so they come back. And you'll see in that next slide, please. That's pretty interesting as well because in the average they see 1.9 films per year, while we're launching 3 to 5 only. So they're really loyal. So that's another thing. Trailers, way ahead, please. 6 months, 8 months, give us a trailer because we need that audience sitting there, they'll come back. So I remember when you had Santa vs. the Snowman, I put the trailer on in July and we had all the shows were sold out. So please, a teaser, anything to put on the screen. It's very important. Every time we say it, but sometimes we get the trailer same time as the film. I mean, this is advertising for us.
Next slide.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. Okay, Mark, let's hear your side from Australia and from your two theaters.
In many ways, we had there's a similar pattern, and the more I speak to other exhibitors, there are some familiar patterns. I mean, one is obviously the education groups. It's a key part of all theatres. And Sydney was a standalone commercial theatre. Melbourne we operated as a commercial theatre within a museum environment. The percentage of school admissions were pretty identical between the two. So it wasn't necessarily related to being in an institution. It was the films themselves were a draw card, and obviously linked to marketing it well to schools. But as Julie said, we had about 20% of our admissions were coming from those school groups, but it represented about 15% of revenue. But having said that, try and show me a cinema that at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning has 400 or 500 patrons in. And the only place you'll see that is in a large format screen. It's terrific business that the cinemas only dream of. You know, the mothers and young babies sessions that they have and those sort of things just don't pull in the same numbers. So it's a very significant part of the business. It brings in less revenue. However, it fills a day part that otherwise would be very empty. And so that's a similar pattern for us. And in terms of the documentaries, same thing. The Sydney Theatre is in a busy tourist destination in Sydney, and yet tourists represent a very small percentage of those people who came to the theatre. Melbourne is in a different location, but likewise, tourism was a very small part. Your core audience is your local market. And we would often talk, how could we look at increasing attendance to the theatre? What could we do? What could we do to get an extra 25,000 people a year? And the real answer was, bring back 25,000 existing customers to come one more time a year. You're far more likely to do that. One of the biggest things you'll find is that people, the only way people understand what happens in a giant screen theatre is actually having attended. Otherwise, people just don't get it. And those people that get it, it's amazing. When you say to them, we've got a film coming about whales, those people form almost an instant mental picture. Oh, that'll look really cool on the screen. You can only form that mental picture if you've actually sat in a theatre before. So that loyal local audience is a real key part of your business, and getting to understand the sort of films they want to see is a key part of your success. And as you know, as Julie said, you don't release a lot of films in the course of a year. 3 to 5 is pretty normal. Some theatres make up to about 8, but you wouldn't see people release many more than that. So the key is to get your audience coming back, and a big part of that is some sort of form of loyalty or membership. And I've seen there's a number of excellent schemes. In fact, Paul Wild from Victoria is here. Paul runs a very good membership scheme, and there's a variety. And in this day and age, it's a lot easier than it used to be, because you can look at taking a film where your projections on attendance are not necessarily huge, but you need to talk to that audience. And if you're looking at 25,000 admissions for a film, which in our terms is not a lot, mainstream media advertising is just out of the question to reach such a small market. But in this day and age now, with email and having a database, again, of local people, you can activate those people much more quickly. And that's a key part, is recognizing that your local audience is absolutely key, and their loyalty is key, and knowing how to talk to them and bring them back more often is a key part.
Mark, you talked about, you have a family ticket. I thought was interesting. Is one price for the family.
Yeah, well, I have a museum background as well, and the museum I worked in had a family ticket. And to me, one of the things that Julie was saying also in recognizing your research is the type of customer that you get. And we defined our customers as culturally active. And going to an IMAX theatre and a museum is part of an ongoing stream of activities. These people, this is not a one-off. It's part of what they do, especially as families. That they'll sit on a Sunday, often planning what they'll be doing the following weekend. In the old days of reading the weekend newspapers, that would be part of their information. But they're on the lookout. They're getting their e-newsletters from everything from the theatre to museums, summer festivals. So they're a very active group. And families for us were important, and obviously cost is a big factor. And so we had a family ticket. It was funny, really. I was just telling Mary Jane, we actually had two people very angrily contact us and say, how dare we define the family? Because our family ticket, you had to come up with some sort of structure. It was 2 adults and 2 kids. And they were sort of outraged that we had defined what a family was. But we had variations on that. We actually had 1 adult and 3 kids. We had an additional kids cheaper ticket. But that was a key part too, was to structure it in a way that made it attractive for the family.
Thank you, Mark. Now let's hear from Greg, representing the producers and the filmmakers. Your viewpoint on who is the audience and what do they want? Oh, here.
Do that one. Okay. Well, thank you, Mary Jane. It's an interesting thing because when the industry began, we really didn't know who our audience was. It sounds naive and stupid, but IMAX and our company and the other companies that were operating then 45 years ago, we didn't really stop to think about, because we had so many people that were excited about this gigantic screen and this new medium. When Two Fly opened at the Air and Space Museum, it sold out screenings all summer long, and in the first year it had 1.5 million people through that theater. And so after, and they actually started charging 50 cents admission, and then the sponsor, Conoco, got so embarrassed that they were making so much money that they dropped it down to 25 cents per person. And after that moment, every museum in the world saw that example, and IMAX had everyone clamoring for an IMAX theater in their locations all around the world. Now, it wasn't for maybe another 5 or 6 years that we started doing studies on who was actually coming. First we thought, oh, we are getting everyone. Well, that wasn't true. It's like what Robin said earlier in that session. We make movies and we show them to people who think. And it's a different audience than your feature film audience by about 100%. You have people that are interested in lifelong learning. They come to an IMAX theater that's in a museum because they're interested in learning. They're interested in finding out new things about the world, about enriching their lives and the lives of their children. It was also interesting at one point, one researcher found out that people were proud to bring their kids to a museum setting in an IMAX theater because they felt like they were being good parents. So they loved that feeling of, boy, I'm enriching my kid. So about 1986, Mary Pat Ryan of IMAX did a gigantic study, and she found out that the person, she did the study based on why do people come to these giant screen theaters? Why is IMAX a successful and profitable medium? And she found out there was one characteristic, and that was the people that came wanted a fun, in other words, enjoyable, entertaining, surprising, learning, in other words, educational. So they needed content that was accurate and truthful, and they needed experience. So those three things: fun, learning, experience. The experience was critical, and I think a lot of us are forgetting that, is that this giant screen with all of its clarity, and sometimes it's 3D and its wonderful sound system, is a completely different thing from the experiences that people have normally, and that's why they come. They come because they need that experience. They don't get it on their TV at home. They don't get it in regular feature films when your viewing angle is only 30 degrees. They want that 90-degree, or sometimes in dome screens, 180-degree enveloping experience that our medium can give them, and no other medium can. And then we've done, since Mary Pat did her first studies, we've done studies every other year since that time, seeing if there's any change, and whether there's changes around the world. Is an Asian audience different from an American audience? Is a European audience different? What we found is generally the audiences are pretty much the same, but they do want that fun learning experience, and they do want content that's accurate, new to them, something that they haven't read about or seen on television 10 times already. They want new subjects done in interesting ways. They want to be not lectured to, but they want to be informed, but not too often. They want that experience of being there. It's like when you watch the Cuba film, there are very few words in that film, but they're just enough to lead you through this experience of music and color and excitement of this beautiful land and its wonderful people. That's what you want from a big screen movie. When we did National Parks Adventure, we tried to do the same thing where we'd set up a scene and then let the scene play almost without a word for 2 to 3 minutes. That's the kind of thing that our audience wants. It's different from a feature film completely, and it's absolutely 100% different from television. So those are the things that we've learned from looking at our audience, why people come to an IMAX theater, you know, and it's not easy to come to an IMAX theater. You have to find a babysitter or bring your kids, get down there, buy a ticket for $10 or more to spend, you know, on a 40-minute film. It's very rare to get people to those kinds of experiences. I can't believe that we're still successful with it. It seems magical to me. And but you have to understand who our audience is, and they're people that want to be not looked down at, talked down to, but they want to be informed and entertained in an intellectual way.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, the distributors. The distributors really are interesting because you have 2 audiences. So, Mark, do you want to start with the view of the audience from your perspective?
Actually, I'm gonna go first once. Actually, as a distributor, you look out and every film we make, the audience is 8.1 billion people on the planet, and we believe they will all come. But in reality, the theaters can't accommodate them. So actually, I've been in this business long enough that when I started, there was about 60 theaters in the world. And if you went to a cultural center in a major city, that's where the IMAX theaters were. And you went because it was the experience. You couldn't see that anywhere else. And I think how the audience has changed over the years is as there was, you saw 275 institutional IMAX theaters out there that they thought, well, you know what, I don't have to see it in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Industry because there's an IMAX in my local museum. And I think one of the things that, and this was brought home Saturday when we premiered a film here, is that when the IMAX trailer came up, the 7, 6, 5, 4, 3 countdown trailer, I heard the audience go, wow. And I think what we've forgotten is that when it's a little bit like someone said yesterday, is that if you're in New York, if you live in New York, you don't go to the Statue of Liberty because it's there all the time and you just kind of forget to go. And I think that's one of the things with our audiences, even though there is one of those museums locally, they don't always remember to go. But when they go, they have that wonderful experience, and that's what really engages them. And as Mary Jane said, we have 2 audiences. We showed it to a public audience on a screening on Saturday, and it was fantastic. And then we came here and we were sweating bullets to show it to this audience, which is our industry audience. And we have to get a film past the gatekeepers and make a film that they think will all work for them on their screens to get it in front of the 8 billion people they're going to promise to deliver.
Thank you. Just to build on the 2 audiences, of course, as distributors, we do serve 2 audiences. I will say first about the general public audience. While families still are obviously important, I think how we speak to them has changed dramatically over the years, certainly from when we all started back in the Stone Age. So for one thing, the kids coming in today that are with their families, generally their heads are down and they're looking at their devices. And that's both literal and figurative for the broader influence that so many media sources have on children and adults. And we need to be cognizant of that and understand how they consume the messaging, because it's great once they're there, like everyone has said. You know it when you see it, and you remember it, and you can then extrapolate it for the next time. But when they're first there and they're coming to the institution and they walk in, they're distracted. They're distracted from everything they've consumed in the last hour, last week, last year, or their life. And that's a lot different than families coming in to these theaters and into these institutions years ago. So we need to continue to recognize that, recognize how we speak to them has to continue to evolve. And that's really important to convey this message in a world that's far more competitive, not necessarily equal in terms of the experience, but absolutely competitive in terms of experiences. And if you look at the commercial cinema industry, the latest trends are more comfortable theaters, bigger screens, nicer seats, meals in the theaters. If you look at the theme park and attractions industry, they're trying to bring culture to their rides or make the rides more experiential or have some significance. So there are a lot of things influencing folks, and we got to remember what we have, but learn how to talk to them differently as consumption of media changes and evolves. As for the second audience that we particularly distributors serve, that's about like success in most industries. It's about relationships that we have with the film buyers, understanding that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And there will be times, we've all gone through it, where someone's going to say they're not taking the film, but if you're in this business for the long haul, they're going to take another film. And those relationships from distributors to exhibitors, from filmmakers to exhibitors, are really, really important. And for all the new filmmakers in this industry, encourage you to really start to immerse yourself into this community with every conference, every event, every trip you make, every theater you go to. Because it for film buyers who their makeup has changed quite a bit, they are, as we know, not the riskiest people, as has been said before. They want to trust and know who they're buying from, and that comes with relationships and that comes with time. And I think the people who've been around for a while have at least accomplished that, a sense of trust, if not respect and confidence every single time. So we got to be cognizant of that all the time, and I think anybody coming into the industry should recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint. You could have a hit today and the next film might not fly, but there'll be another one after that, hopefully, and that's just the nature of how this works. So don't put all the marbles on the table for one shot and think this is all there is, and if you're great, everything's going to be great, or if you're a failure, you're never going to succeed. You got to try to play the long game as best you can.
Mark, do you think that the way you market to when you talk to the theater managers, has that changed over time? It seems like what we deliver to the theaters has really changed a lot too. The packages that we have to deliver because of the changing media, how has that evolved and changed? What do you do differently?
This Mark or that Mark?
Oh, sorry, you. I was talking about
I'm
talking
kidding.
to the theater managers.
Well, when John and I started, of course, we communicated via smoke signal. But obviously, communication technology has evolved how we communicate with each other quite a bit. I think now, as time has gone on, like Greg alluded to the fact that people didn't matter what film it was. Now people want to see the film. They want to see the film early. They want to see it during its evolution. They want to have access to things. We can share many things, certainly via the internet and via online sharing and such. We have to work towards sharing it in the format ultimately, and we got to just keep up with that demand all the time as early as we can.
Mark, did you want to say something on that?
I would just talk a little bit about the relationship thing, but this is more from a theatre perspective, and I think for filmmakers is one of the things I used to do regularly in the theatre was sit in on a film session and, more importantly, exit with the audience and just listen and watch what they do. It's amazing what you pick up and what you hear. The most soul-destroying thing is no one's talking about the film as they leave. They're going on to whatever they're doing next. But the great thing is to pick up what particularly families are saying, what the kids are saying to the parents, what the parents are saying back, and what couples are saying to each other, and what is it? What boxes are they ticking? And Greg nails it. It's the experience they'll be talking about. That'll be the first thing they're talking about. Is I felt like I could touch that elephant right on its trunk, and that felt really good when we flew over the cliff, and that there's some adrenaline going, and it's great to pick up on those cues. And being on the distribution side, I've sat in meetings where people are going through scripts, and someone says, well, why don't we do an aerial and we'll go over that cliff edge? And people go, oh, no, that's been done a million times before. It's like, yeah, sure it has, but audiences love that stuff. And as the research says, 1.9 visits a year on average. They're not seeing these films every week. We are. We live and breathe them. And having a trailer on for 6 months, the projectionist will tell you, oh, wow, when are you going to take that off? It's been on every single day. It's like, yeah, you see it 7, 8 times a day, but our customers don't. And I think that's a very important part of it, is understanding what happens at a theatre level, what audiences do. And it really is well worth taking the time to sit with an audience. Great to watch them. I mean, 3D is fantastic. There's nothing better than a whole bunch of school kids in watching an underwater film, and you watch them. For 10 minutes, they're actually not listening to the narration. They're trying to touch the fish. And they're loving it, though. They're engaged. Christopher Nolan came and spoke to a few of the theatres a few years back, and he talked about what brought him into the industry. And as a 14-year-old, his parents took him to an IMAX theatre, and it was one of the Flight films. It may well have been To Fly. And he talked about how they were sitting in one of the back rows, and the audience were all moving in the flight sequences. And he said to himself, I want to make films that engage people that much, that they're moving, they think they're there. And to actually see that and see what triggers there are for your audience is incredibly valuable.
Let's talk a little bit more about what the audience wants in a film, because, we have our audience for somewhat is segmented. You have the parent that's sitting in the audience with their kids thinking, oh, I hope my kids are really going to like this film and they're going to learn something. Then you have the teacher sitting in the audience going, oh, I hope there's going to be curriculum. My principal won't be mad if I brought the kids here. And then you have the kids sitting there going, I hope this isn't boring. I hope this is fun. And then you have the seniors that want to go on a trip when they're sitting in the audience. So I'd like to ask everyone about that. How do you really put that together, deliver the film for all those audiences, like Greg says, learning and the experience? Julie, what about your audience?
Based on the surveys, the animal films always work, underwater, and travel. And the most important thing, especially now with the audience being exposed to so many sources of media, is like, why should I leave the comfort of my living room with my glass of wine, pay parking, pay a ticket, to see a documentary that probably I can see on Netflix? And that's the most important thing. When we see, and you touch a point when you say we feel like we've seen those films, and I feel that I see the same fish over and over and over. And we just exceed $1 million box office with Ocean 3D. And we were asking among the team and say, why? Why? I mean, it's fish, underwater, but because, and then we sat down in the theater and say, okay, what's the difference between this film and a documentary on TV? And that's what really, this is the target that we can, the target audience we can really pull out from their living room, that you'll see something you won't see on TV. You'll feel something you won't feel on TV. Not too much narration, great music, great images, 3D in your face, and that touch everyone. I mean, adults, families, and when parents see their kids happy, they're happy. And that's why we do more and more testing with the kids, not with parents. We ask kids,
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And I think a key part of that also is understanding what are those triggers that will get people to get out of home. And there's a lot to be said for thinking very hard about titles. What are you naming the film, and how, and the imaging that you're using. Because if you understand the key drivers, then your title and your marketing needs to also inform that. So your audience is looking for something different, and the content often of our films is similar. There's a lot of natural history documentaries, and you can see natural history documentaries in a lot of different places. So why would you leave home for it? What is that trigger? What will the messaging be that excites the audience. And, you know, complex, obscure titles may deliver a fantastic film, but if the audience isn't making the association with, wow, that would be great, on the IMAX screen, they're not coming.
Yeah, yeah.
If I may add two other titles, if at the box office we have to explain what the film is about, meh, it won't be a succeed. So every time I can say, volcanoes, what is the film about? Volcanoes. Elephant, what is the film is about? And when sometimes we see subtitles, we don't need subtitles. We can't use subtitles. So one key word, and I can just pull up all our numbers, and I swear all the succeed goes with a very good title that explains what the film is about.
And Greg, as a filmmaker, talk about your viewpoint, especially getting the education and the entertainment mix there.
I think you really do need to educate the audience in a way that they know they don't think that they're being educated too. And that's difficult. So writing a wonderful script, getting wonderful characters who are going to come right off the screen into your lap in terms of their charisma and their uniqueness is really important. But I think the biggest thing is to try to get a film that's different from what people have seen before. So a film that has different subjects and different sequences from what people have seen on television. And they see a tremendous amount on television. Mark referred to all the natural history films that are there. When we started making films about animals in the 80s and 90s, don't forget there wasn't cable. Discovery Channel didn't have 5 channels. National Geographic was not on TV at all, except for maybe once every 3 months. Once that happened, and cable came about with, you know, non-stop, you know, Animal Planet, you name it, 24 hours a day, the audience shifted. They wanted something then more unusual. And Julie referred to the 3D element. You know, when you saw Into the Deep or Deep Sea 3D, Howard Hall's films, all of a sudden, it was a new dimension, and you felt like you were there underwater with those animals. That was far different than free television. Today, you've got to do something, you've got to be more clever with your filmmaking to actually offer the audience something new that they hadn't ever thought about enjoying before. And I think that's the problem with our industry, is that we're running out of things that could be maybe new. We have to keep trying, though, and not giving up on new subjects that may be more difficult to produce, but will gain a new audience and a new kind of appreciation for what this gigantic format is all about, which is experience. I think one of the things with a theater or a distributor is once you have a customer, someone who's really sold on the medium, don't lose them by giving them a less than perfect experience. Your projection, your sound, everything has to be perfect all the time. Their experience has to be wonderful, but also the film has to be really good. So don't take films that are shot in substandard formats or maybe don't fill out the screen. The 3D is off. Things that are going to be annoying to the audience, they'll leave. They won't come back. I always relate it to, and thankfully I think the filmmaking is getting better and better, but I relate it to a restaurant where if a restaurant has a really good reputation, you go often, you're satisfied, but if you have one bad meal, you're not going to go back. And that's exactly the same with these giant screen theaters. It's not something that they absolutely need to survive. It's a decision, and if you offer them something that is not satisfying, they're not going to come back.
It's an interesting point, actually. Somebody once said to me in the early days of the Sydney Theatre, "Oh, I don't like IMAX, I don't go." And I said, "But you wouldn't say that about cinema. You go and see one movie and go, oh, film's hopeless. Never going to see a film again." And yet, as Greg said, people will. They see us as existing in a special category, and you have to take great care of them, and you can't lose them.
John?
And I think actually Mike Day from Science Museum of Minnesota said it best is if you provide a bad experience, because people are coming for the film and they want to have a wonderful experience. If they come for a film and they have a bad experience and they walk out not talking about the film, then that doesn't affect that box office. It'll affect the next 2 box offices. And actually I think he said that quite a few years ago, and I think now it's even more challenging, is I think that if they walk out and they're not satisfied that this was the experience they needed to have, they won't come back. And getting those people to come back is nearly impossible. I think one thing on the audience, though, is that not every film is the same. And I think we saw that with Jerusalem in that, you know, the standard 30 to 50-year-olds with kids in school groups wasn't the same audience because many theaters reported that they had an audience that was much older and they sold many more adult tickets than they did kids because the topic was different. They still had their standard audience, but they increased their audience by reaching out to different groups that don't normally attend. And those same people, when they come in, they have the wow experience, and I think those trends maintained, and they were able to get it to come back. Do you have anything?
Okay, well, I want to start talking about marketing a little bit now because really, for me, from the beginning, if you don't market the films and you don't get an audience, marketing is so important. And it always has been from the very beginning. So both Julie and Mark, we have some examples of marketing that we want to talk a little bit about. Julie?
Powerful poster. Okay, I'll have enemies here. I have one example, but I could have brought 100 of examples.
The next one?
Yeah. Well, this one is a good example. We need a powerful image. What we receive, I would say 98% of the time, is a busy poster. We don't even know what the film is about. And then there's titles and then subtitles. And remember, we have to translate everything. So we have to put French on top of it. So imagine this was major banner on the highway. I have, 2 seconds to grab your attention? So if there's a bird and a mountain and little flowers, and no way, you can just drive by. So most of the time what we receive is not what we expected. Next slide. I'll give you an example. That's what we receive on the left. That's what we want on the right. Thank God most of film distributors are open-minded and they allow us to change the artwork. But I told you earlier, there's 8 million people walking in the old port of Montreal with their kids, their beer, and I have to grab their attention. If I put the poster on the left, they're just going to walk by. They don't know if it's an advertising for a zoo but with the other poster we played, they stop, they look at the poster. Like Mark said, I walk a lot in the old port and look at our customers' reaction to our artwork. And sometimes we ask for a single image, and then we got a single image, and we get another one, and they add, I don't know, snow and a helicopter. Say, you don't get it. So please, just powerful image, and more than one, because what has changed that we use a lot of social media, and we test our banners. So we'll have 2 or 3 banners on the web, and see which one is the most powerful, and then use that one as advertising.
Mark Katz, I guess, comments?
I just want to say that Julie's points are very important, and all distributors, we certainly listen to the successful theaters when they give us this kind of feedback. It's important, though, that we provide as many different options as possible. The key image is critical, and in some markets, they echo your comments about simple and straightforward, but it's also good to have a variety of images, a variety of artwork treatments, because every market's different, as the saying goes.
And sometimes it's hard to find that one image. We had the film Dream Big, which was about engineering. We could have had bridges and skyscrapers, and we didn't have one single image when the topic was engineering. But what we were trying to convey was inspiration, and kids to get excited about engineering. How do you do that? And Lori Rick worked on this poster, and it with our artists, it was fantastic because we had that image of the kid with his hands in the air, and that's what we were trying to say with the film was inspiration and kids. So we had the various architectural representations, but you got to convey. Sometimes it's an emotion from a poster as well. So it's very difficult. We spend a lot of time working on the key image. It is so critical.
What we're asking for is flexibility, because we know what's working in our market. I can give you another example with Superpowered Dogs. Henry is Canadian. In Montreal, we ski a lot. So we would like, to use Henry. Henry means a lot. He has his goggle. We're going to show the film in the summer. In the summer in Montreal, temperature goes from very cold to very, very humid. So in July, you see that cutie Canadian Henry with ski goggles, a super poster, that sells. We'll use other media to say there's other incredible dogs in it, but trust the exhibitors and what they know will work in the market.
Definitely.
And just to echo that, I mean, they're the local experts in the market, and we defer, as a distributor, we defer to them to know how to market in their own market. But that said, we also create a key image for the film, and with the case of Superpowered Dogs, we have 5 different, because not everybody's French-Canadian in skiing, we have 5 different hero posters that were created. We have an Ocean's 11 looking poster that was created just specifically for social media. We have the key art, and all of it is trying to tie into a specific brand. But so you have to be flexible, and you also have to think way ahead because they need far more assets. We had one request for a 40-foot by 5-foot wide billboard, which doesn't exist anywhere except for at the California Science Center, and we had to go back and then figure out how to make your art flexible enough to be able to accommodate all of these different sizes and shapes, and all of that has to go into the package. And yes, James, you cannot do it for $50,000.
Yeah, right. Because then you have 2D versus 3D, so you have to do all the materials in 2D for the 2D theaters, and then all 3D, and wow, it gets to be a lot. Yeah.
Just a note to the filmmakers, you're hearing all this, so what that says to you is please provide as many assets as possible, as early as possible to the distributors to start this process, because if we don't get the assets from the filmmakers or from the production, it's hard to then deliver to the theaters the way they need it to be delivered.
Another element we really need is behind the scenes. We have to last 6 months, 8 months with a film while we're competing with other activities. So it's the only way we come back on social media and say something new. So if we have behind the scenes on fun facts, or while you're filming, just pile some stuff and give it to us and we'll have fun with it. And again, way ahead. 30% of our attendance comes from word of mouth. So as soon as we can get the word out and get some people in the theater, people will talk about the film, and then we post, and so behind the scenes, please.
I'll just reinforce that. One of the big things that's come out of research in social media is you can't sell. A selling message direct people just is a turn-off. One of the things people really respond well to is take them behind the scenes. Show them something that they can't normally see, that you can't pay to see. We used to do the most simple things in the Sydney Theatre, which was just a short 30-second, 60-second piece back in the days of 1570 of the print arriving, being unboxed by the projectionist. Now, an everyday thing for a theatre, but it got the most clicks, the most hits. People ask all sorts of questions. Why is it coming in all those separate parts? What's the projectionist doing? And those are the things that were popular. People want to know. So location footage of getting cameras in unusual places. It's a great sell for the film, because if you can show a camera crew hanging off a precipice somewhere, it speaks to what the film is probably going to look like on the screen. So that's saying, look, we've gone to these great lengths to get you these great pictures. It reinforces that story.
I remember there was a GSCA panel one time, with the Wake Up to New Ideas that Diane started, and the theater, there was a theater, I think it was in Indianapolis, but I can't remember exactly. It was it was next to a zoo. So they were playing the film Elephants, I think, and they did this fantastic thing where they had a live elephant come to the entrance of the theater with the roll of film, like with delivering the rolls of film to the theater about elephants. It was just fantastic. It was just those kind of stunts, those kinds of ideas to get people kind of, wow, that's an elephant on the giant screen. I really want to go see that.
We had World War II reenactors deliver our D-Day Normandy print. Great photo opportunity.
Yep.
And with the behind the scenes, I can relate a story from National Geographic. The producer of the video content for the social media at National Geographic has to do about 2,500 pieces a year, and he has there's a video clip of a baby monkey riding a pig, and yes, you should all watch it. It has about 42 million hits, and he says, every day my job is to find something that will keep them from watching Baby Monkey. And that's the kind of behind the scenes things, that's where the behind the scenes things are. If you put up an ad on your Twitter feed or on your Instagram or whatever, people aren't going to share that. But like Daniel did some shout outs for theaters in the field, and Sean Casey has done some for Back to the Brink, and those are the kinds of things where they're actual content that they can look at, and then the museums put them on their sites, and then the people look at them and go, hey, they tag their friends in them, they share them, and that's the marketing of today. When we first started, you'd do some ad slicks, you'd do some radio spots, some TV spots, and a poster, and that was pretty much the kit. Now you're doing social media spots, you're doing behind the scenes spots, and all of those things. And as Julie says, they start 6 months in advance. So the sooner you can do it, and you have to think about it, and you have to budget for someone in the field to be there to shoot the shots of you making the shots, because all of that stuff that's marketing today in these theaters.
That reminds me, for Dream Big, we had 26 different videos. We had Instagram videos, we had educational videos. It was unbelievable, the number of videos that we provided to everyone. Sometimes the behind the scenes, I want to put on my GSCA hat for a minute with the membership committee. We're going to instigate this new blog for behind the scenes. So we want people to come back to the GSCA website to see what we're doing, and we want producers to send us the GSCA while you're filming, because even it's fun for people to know. Well, like I would love to have known what Dogs was filming while it was happening, and everybody else that's out there filming. It's fun because then you feel like you're an insider. You feel like you're part of it. And I remember with Everest. And Greg, if you could talk about that, when they were actually filming on Everest, that was interesting to get the updates.
Well, doing the Everest expedition was different, and people were interested in it in advance. And knowing that, I set up a deal with Nova, which the internet had just been invented. Kids across the country were just getting involved with the internet as an educational tool. And so with Nova, and Nova was starting their programs, getting out to kids in classrooms across the country. Something like 80,000 classrooms had internet contact with our Everest. We sent a reporter, Lisa Clark. She was there at base camp with our team. Nova financed it. Every other day, there was a report sent out on the internet, like a full-page report with photos, followed by, like I said, 80,000 classrooms, and they could respond back. They could actually fax back. They couldn't, the internet wasn't two-way back then, but they could actually fax. We had a fax machine there at base camp. Things would come in. Here's a question. And it was interesting, and that's part of the reason that when the tragedy happened, because it was the first time that people had actually followed any kind of activity on Everest ever, and as it was actually happening, unfolding, and that's why the tragedy was so well covered all around the world. And of course that led to the big success of that film. If you can think of ways to connect yourself to your audience in advance, you're going to start to drive that thing that Julie keeps saying, trailers early, all this stuff early, everything should be early. Start the interest in your project way early so it becomes an event. By the time that we brought out Everest, which was actually 2 years after the climb, you would have thought, okay, people have forgotten about this, but no, they hadn't. Into Thin Air helped, all kinds of TV shows helped, Turning Point helped. You ended up with an event kind of attraction, which, you know, if you're making a wonderful film or exhibiting a wonderful film, try to make it into an event. You know, combine it with other things like an exhibit, like a book, like a speaker series, elephants bringing the print in. Whatever it is, combine it so that it's just not a film. It's something else. It's something that people will end up hearing about and then getting excited about. And then because they know about it, they all of a sudden think that they're an expert about it, and they tell everyone about it. So you can be clever, you know, there's a multitude of ideas, but just be clever.
Well, I want to go back to marketing because it always comes back to marketing. We have some samples here from Mark Bretherton as well, because what I really like about what Mark has done is it's about selling the giant screen format. Like, how do you market the experience and the film together? That's always a challenge, I think, for the distributors when we're producing materials. How do you sell the experience and the film at the same time? You had some creative things you did. I always like these.
This was part of the reason this was all years ago is I lost my presentations, but Mary Jane managed to retrieve one from years ago. But this was part of the brief was try and look for something in alternative media. And the guys came back with an idea in Sydney to do something on the beaches, these little sort of shark shapes actually on the beach, but they were a little bit small. I didn't feel they had the impact, and so again, I didn't feel they'd met the brief. So I threw it back at them. I said, "There's the germ of a really good idea in here. Go away and come back with something else." So they came back with this, which was a 3-meter high fiberglass fin that floated in the water. And they towed it around Sydney Harbour behind a speedboat as if the giant shark was chasing the speedboat. But Sydney Harbour is a very, very busy harbour. A lot of people travel to work on a ferry in the morning, and so during rush hour, you're going to get to a lot of people. It's a very busy waterway. So we were able to reach a lot of people, and we got a lot of cut through. Obviously, people film it with their phones and that sort of thing. But again, we had to talk to big. I mean, obviously, you don't see fins that big in Sydney Harbour, thank goodness. But
So what else
you know,
did you
again, we
here's
reinforced it.
another one.
And this was working with, we worked with Sony on this one, this ginormous inflatable Spider-Man that we put climbing down the building, actually put over the poster. We actually covered the Spider-Man poster, but I think we ticked all the boxes with this one. And again, talking of social media, the number of people that came to the theatre, you know, and were taking selfies or shots in front of the ginormous Spidey was fantastic. It was expensive, but it was well worth doing.
The last slide.
And the other one is validating their choice. So as you arrive in the foyer at Sydney Theatre, we built this housing for standees. And really it was just saying, you made a great choice. Pat yourself on the back. Lucky you, you're seeing it in IMAX. And again, selfies, social media, everyone was stopping to take a picture because, you know, the standees are normally pretty attractive. But it really was. They didn't need to write a message with that. It was there. They're going out to all their friends. Guess where I'm seeing it? And again, you validate their choice, guys. You made the best choice.
Thanks, Mark. Well, getting back to the distribution package, distributors have quite a big job when it comes to selling the film to the theaters. And we were kind of joking around, in the distributors. Like, I used to be an exhibitor, then I'm a distributor. I think same with Mark. It's a lot different. First of all, it's much more fun coming to these meetings when you're an exhibitor. When you're wined and dined and you're the star. With a distributor, you are working the whole time, and it's hard. And so we were kind of joking around things that I've heard. What are all the things that you have heard, Mark and John, and about why theaters, what theaters tell you why they won't book a film?
Thank you. Can I just start by saying, like, all the veteran distributors in this business, I love exhibitors. They're wonderful. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a long game. And I have a couple stats before I answer your question, a couple stats that I think we should all continue to remember. I read this almost every week, but 48% of salespeople never follow up on a first call. 25% stop after the second call. 12% make it to 3 calls. Only 10% make it to more than 3 calls. 80% of sales are made on the 5th to 12th call. It applies to our industry too, I promise. And it doesn't matter how great a film we have, it applies to our industry. So it's a long game, and patience is really important. And filmmakers should please, please, please continue to remember that too when they say, why haven't you sold my movie? Why haven't you sold my movie? And it is, if it's for lack of trying, that's okay, but if it's not for lack of trying. So with that has come some wonderful reasons why not over the years, creative ones as well. I will say, I think, again, speaking on behalf of all distributors, the last thing we ever want to hear is nothing. No response is the worst response. A quick no, while not what we want, is still at least appreciated. But when the no's happen, there have been some really interesting and funny reasons, creative ones too. First and foremost, the tried and true, I didn't like it. Next, my market's different than every other market. Others include, I loved it, but my committee just didn't. That's the old buck passer. Not educational enough. Too educational. I loved it, but I got to see it on a big screen. Doesn't work on a dome. Can't afford the film print. That excuse is fortunately getting less and less. Here's a couple I love. Water films just don't work for us. Space films just don't work for us. Dinosaur films just don't work for us. And then my favorite, and this is true, we had the drive here for our preview screening, but the encryption key didn't work, so we canceled the screening and moved on. That really happened. And I'm sure there's many more.
It's too science-y. It's not science-y enough. Cultural films, we tried one once. They just don't work in our market. And I think the last one was, it's too long. If you could make it half as long, we would take it.
Well, and then we know why they do take it. Because they love the film, and a lot of people take the films too because it goes with an exhibit. A lot of people say I can't play the film because there's nothing in the museum that goes with it. It's not an exhibit. So even the theaters I think are programming differently. We always love to encourage museums to build a program around the film, so it really makes sense with the entire institution.
I think some of it also is understanding that all the theatres are different and they're in different cycles. I was talking to Gordon Stalens from Tennessee Aquarium, and he was saying that next year from March they're opening a major turtle exhibit in the aquarium, and they will take Turtle Odyssey then to coincide with that because it makes perfect sense to them. Maybe the distributor would like to have the film on sooner, but in that theatre cycle it makes perfect sense to take that film then. And that's a common thing, that each market's different. Julie has a horrific winter. She doesn't have anywhere near as many visitors as she gets in the 3 to 4 months of summer. So her cycle's complete. She will program very differently. Sydney's winter's very mild. It's a little bit too chilly for the beach, and so it's actually a good movie-going time. So each market will play it differently and respond differently in terms of the films that they want. And as Mark said, it is a long-term game, and a film. And when you make your film, it's well worth considering the shelf life that it will have. If it's going to date in a certain period of time, then you're already losing some of that market. Some of the classic underwater films, the Into the Deeps, there's a timelessness to them. They're beautifully shot. There's nothing in it that will particularly date it, other than the fact the oceans are changing rapidly, unfortunately. But in a sense, there's a timeless quality, so I don't have to book it this year. I can book it in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. And in each market, it's a new release. Because generally, there's only one, maybe two large screen theaters in town. And what's new to that theater is a new film. And people are not saying, oh, that was released 3 years ago, and I'm not going to see that, it's an old film. As far as they're concerned, there's a new film on at the theater, and if they're interested, they'll come.
Anything you want to say, Greg? Okay. Well, we have a few more things we were going to talk about, but let's open it up to the audience. We'd like to see if there's any questions out there for any of the panelists. If there's some things that came to mind, we'd be happy to answer those. No questions?
Can I start with one?
Yeah, yes.
I have one for Greg. For years, you've been listening to exhibitors. You present your film, you present a rough cut, and then you hear too much science, not enough science,
Yeah.
not enough entertaining, too much entertaining, too long, too short. How can you gather this information and make a film, and how do you decide that, okay, this will be it? So if Julie thinks there's too much education, too bad for her, I want to aim for this market.
I never listen to you guys.
I know. Next question.
We all knew
And we
that.
never book your films.
No, you know what we do? We go right to the customer. And we do a tremendous amount of polling and testing with our films to try to determine what the level of entertainment is and where we can improve the entertainment aspects and the storytelling with every film. With Everest, I mean, I was showing your statistics with regard to gender, 52% female audience. But that's kind of deceptive. The women are responsible for probably 70% of the attendance overall because they drive their family and their neighbors and everyone down to the theater, buy them all tickets and go in, and dads, they arrive alone. It's like a different kind of person. And you end up with a film like Everest, which is a completely male-dominated sport. 90% of the people climbing the mountain are men. 90% of the people interested in the mountain are men. How do you sell that movie to a woman? Well, that was our big challenge. And so we changed our story. The 2 months, 2 years that Steve Judson and I spent editing and perfecting that movie was basically changing everything about it, even the way that the logo looked and the way the poster looked, so it appealed to a woman. And we finally got it to the point where it would very successfully appeal to a woman. And our results, our post-showing success showed that women were actually liking the film 2 or 3% higher than our male audience. The men wanted more, gore and people falling over cliffs and whatever else. She says the guys were cute. But 3 out of the 6 characters were female. That wasn't accidental. Araceli was charming, and that was not accidental. The fact that she and Paula and Ed were there on their honeymoon, and that was a very important characteristic of these characters and their storytelling. Araceli loved chocolate. Well, everyone can relate to that. So anyway, you have to listen to your audience. If you do a film that the audience is loving, the theaters will love it because it'll draw attendance. And I think we've seen that with so many films over the years. Maybe, lots of people complained about Everest. Well, the geology is just sort of tacked on there. The science aspects are a little bit hidden in the adventure story. Still, the people got so much out of that film, and The theaters were really, really happy with it because the attendance numbers were record-breaking.
Any other questions out there?
You guys have talked a bit about ensuring quality for the audiences, and I wonder if you've received any or heard about any backlash on 3D, poor quality 3D, or even presumably good quality 3D that the audiences don't like.
I think 3D is an interesting one because I think our format has probably delivered some of the best 3D that there is. And for a long while, we were very lucky. We had a monopoly on 3D. And in fact, you know, from spending time in the foyer and behind the box office in the Australian theatres, it was surprising, almost disappointing when you've done a lot of marketing to hear a family come up and go, what's next in 3D? And literally buy the ticket just based on the fact that it was in 3D. And I think the first of the Hollywood films that we showed was The Polar Express in 3D. And the response we got from people is, we came to see it because we knew how good your 3D was. So we've certainly have set the bar, and we've set it pretty high, and the architecture of the theatres and the brightness of the lamps and all those other factors are a big contributing factor. Having said that, there has been disappointing 3D and substandard 3D, mainly since the advent of digital. That certainly, you know, changed things and made it, in a sense, easier for people to produce something of a lower quality. Do audience notice? I think Greg really touches on it, and it is that, I remember Greg saying to me, it was the restaurant thing, and it's seeing, you know, mum and dad in the car driving home, and you don't say, oh, that was dreadful, we're never going back. It's just, that was a bit meh, you know, in no hurry to go back. It was okay, but it wasn't as good as I last remember it. And I think that's the damage that's so difficult to measure. You know, if the customers came out demanding their money back and telling you it was a terrible experience, that'd be brilliant, because that's exactly what you want to hear. Then you can act on that, and you can say, right, no more of those films, take the film, you know. But when they don't say anything, and they just don't come back, I think that's the damaging thing. But it is very hard to pinpoint it.
And I think there was mentioned that there's a second audience here, which is the theater. And the theaters are the gatekeepers, and bad 3D, we don't get a lot of pushback from bad 3D from the audiences because it never sees the screen. If a theater's booking 2 or 3 or 4 films a year, and they come here and they see a film that has bad 3D, it just doesn't end up on the screen. So the audiences never see it, which is the worst thing for the filmmakers.
I have a question. Am I supposed? That's me.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was me. Demographics, Robin Doty, Museum of Science, Boston. Demographics, shifting demographics, cultural changes that are going on. How do you deal, how is that being dealt with? Because now our audiences are coming from different walks of life. I was thinking back of Mysteries of India, where I got a whole new crowd of people in who came to see that film I never even expected. And then with Arabia was a different picture altogether. So cultural differences, how are those being dealt with in terms of dealing with audiences?
That's a good thing about social media. So for every film, we do a research and deciding how we're going to market to the different market. Jerusalem was a very good example, and Danielle can speak up. It took me, what, 2 years to say yes, because I couldn't figure it out. And at that time, in the province of Quebec, there was a big debate about cultural issues, and I was so afraid that it would not be well received. So we sat down, we made some research, and we say, okay, who are we going to aim to? And with social media again, it was easier, and press release. And of course, it was easier because Danielle was living in Montreal, so he could tour around in the media. But that, to answer your question, we do a lot of research on marketing and who we're going to target before we brief the agency.
And
No, but at the beginning I said, oh no, I can't play that film. You know, I'm going to have some, especially in Montreal, people are really like, they didn't want to hear about religion. And then we say, okay, we're not going to focus on the religion, we're going to focus on the history. But then, who am I going to sell that film to? really, like who's going to be interested in that film? And having the different cultures in mind, and we, like I say, we went in different markets for it.
And
I want
just-
to make sure I wouldn't miss it, because if you miss it, then the next film can say, no, I'm not going to take a film about culture. It doesn't work in my market.
And that doesn't always fall on the theaters. With Jerusalem, we actually engaged a specific PR firm to market directly to faith-based organizations, so that in every market that the people knew that it was coming, and that was of a tremendous success, and also great box office results for the theaters.
And I think to a certain extent the filmmakers are listening to the theaters. The last couple of films that we've made at MacGillivray, like Dream Big, I remember people saying, you want diversity in the characters. And even national parks, you wanted diversity. And I think we're listening to that, and I've had Greg talk about that too. But when the theaters tell us what they want, we want to listen. If you want more diversity and in your films, and because it's reflecting the whole society, the whole culture, we'll listen to that. We want to deliver what theaters want.
That's why we have 5 kinds of dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a
good question.
Hi, my name is Rajesh. I'm from Cube Cinema. Can I get a sense of how big event cinema is in the giant screen space? And by event cinema, I mean one-off shows. And a related question is, have you experimented with letting the audience program your shows? Like giving them a library and them being able to pick a show and have that seen on the giant screen?
I'm going to take a crack at that. I'm not an authority, but I think, like everything in the giant screen world, we're always a little slower than the commercial cinema world. So I think it's certainly digital has facilitated it happening. I think some theaters experiment with it who are digital. I don't know about audiences programming or not, but I know that there are theaters out there who do or participate in event programming one-offs around a single date. But it's not common, I don't believe yet. But, things are changing with digital. People can do a lot of different things, good and bad. And I know there are exhibitors who do Metropolitan Opera in their giant screen theaters, for example, the most well-known of event programming. So it is happening. I don't think it's common, though, but I don't know if others.
The problem is it's quite intensive for only a short period. You release a new film, you're going to run it 4 or 5 times a day, you're going to play it for 3 to 6 months. You invest a lot of time in that, but then you get a lot of return. And you want that long season, and the fact that it's on screen and people know it's going to be on screen for a while is actually great for perpetuating the season. The problem with the one-off is you have to spend those marketing dollars one way or another, whether it's in labor time, sending out social media posts. You've only got 400 seats. There's only so much return you'll get from that, I don't know if it's worth the effort. You may well sell out the session, and everyone will enjoy what they see, but for the amount of time it takes for that one single screening, and if you're screening on the air every hour and you're open 8 hours a day, and this is only 1 or 2 hours of one day in a week that has lots of other screenings, you have to weigh up the cost.
It's all about the marketing. Really, the digital we had a question back there.
Going back to social media and listening to your audience. I'm Shauna from MacGillivray Freeman. I wanted to know how much you listen to what's going on social media. Is it that you hear comments directly, I love this film, all my friends should see it? Or is it the certain demographics? And how much do you get into the details of the conversation about the film or the theater in general? And how does that influence your programming, one way, positive or negative?
It's a tricky one because, whoever shouts loudest isn't necessarily representing most people. What we found was people didn't necessarily engage in a lot of discussion about the film. It would often be about the experience, what they liked about seeing a film in the theater. And people sort of talked around, there's a lot of peripheral discussion just about where can we go for a bite to eat afterwards? And so the number of people that may comment on social media, you really need to be careful. It's like any research. How big is that base? What sample does it represent? I mean, one of the things we found that was, if we ever got a complaint, particularly in Facebook, we would never respond to that complaint straight away. The community would respond and very often would set the person right, because often a person's complaint is not really justified. It's slightly irrational. They haven't read the instructions or whatever it is. And the community is actually very good at setting people straight. And we often would not intervene at all. We would, in a sense, it would be dealt with by the community themselves. And we found that was the sort of level of discussion that was going on around the theatre, more than very specific information about films. I don't know, Julie, it might be different.
We take it very seriously. We have the luxury of having someone full-time doing social media for the museum and the IMAX theater. And if the same comment comes very often, we'll respond to it. If it, I don't know, I would say the film is too preachy, we'll post something on saying, how important it is to talk about, the water or things like that. So I agree with Mark. It's a symbol, but you can't let it go.
We just have a few minutes left. Any other questions? Okay, I think he asked, is there any kind of attendance or stats on how the theater has drawn in people, how the museum has drawn in people into the theater, or vice versa, that the theater expands the science museum attendance? Was that your question?
Just the correlation of that.
Yeah.
And also whether or not what they choose to see is more of a function of convenience, if they want to just see something, or is it more that they're there specifically to see that?
Yeah. Does the audience come for a particular film, or do they come and just see what the film is playing, and then they decide then?
They decide ahead on the film. That's why the title is so important. That's why the artwork is so important. So they really come they want to see that film in your theater. We, in the survey we did, number one decision making for the visit is the film itself. Number two, location. So that's why if you have competition and then there's a commercial theater playing an educational film with free parking next to your house, you can have a beautiful museum, but they won't come. And what we do is that, and I think most museums do the same thing. If you have a very popular exhibit, then you'll try to sell an IMAX movie or a large format movie as a combo, and do the opposite.
And I would just disagree a little bit. And this is part of the community of GSCA, is that everyone comes here and they're all together, and every museum is the same. In reality, we deal with about 300 museums around the world. They're all different. In Julie's case, that's the facts. And in smaller science centers, sometimes the theater is the driver of attendance, more so than, say, a Museum of Science and Industry or American Museum of Natural History, where they're coming up and they're just buying it as one of the things on the a la carte lunch. So, I mean, it varies so much by market to market, but it's not really consistent.
We have zoos, aquariums, natural history museums. There really is a big difference. And I do know that in several places, that's why the title is so important, because some people in large museums, they don't come for the film. They want to see what's playing, and then the title is super important at that point.
It also depends on the location of the theatre. If you go down to the California Science Centre, you'll notice that their theatre sits outside the Science Centre and has its own independent access, which means that you don't actually have to come to visit the Science Centre at all. Others, you have to actually walk right through the Science Centre, through several of the exhibits before you even get to the theatre. So it really is, as John says, there's such different examples. What one will tell you won't necessarily apply, which actually kind of comes down to what you hear when you're here. I notice that a lot of newcomers will speak to one or two people at the bar and extrapolate what they're told and take it as universal. And one of the lessons is that's not the case. What happens in Montreal could be very different to what happens with Robin in Boston or happens at the California Science Centre. There is a lot of difference and variation. It's frustrating for a lot of people, but it's the reality of the way it works.
I think one of the things that I've heard is a new effort that comes up about every 5 years is to increase the capture rate, which means people are going to the museum, they're tourists, they're locals, they go there, they love it, but then if you can capture that audience who's there anyway to bring them into the IMAX, that's a key thing. And basically, there are a lot of different angles that are being talked about, how to do that, including posters all around the facility. But one of the reasons that IMAX as a separate medium has always worked is that it offers the audience that's strolling around a museum reading stuff a chance to rest, chance to sit down, rest their feet, get their kids organized, watch a wonderful movie in an air-conditioned area, comfortable seats, and just kind of zone out for a little bit and have fun as a unit together. This is the reason that it worked like gangbusters at the Air and Space Museum when it opened in 1976. People were tired. It was hot in the summer. You know, Washington does get hot. And they were loving the fact that they could spend a half an hour, you know, To Fly was just 26 minutes, a half an hour just resting with this wonderful experience of noise and thrills and beautiful scenery, and then they went out and read more stuff. It's a wonderful combination, and it's that combination that's really made this industry work. We can't really forget about that, but it'd be great to be able to capture more of that audience that's there at the museum on their own.
While educating them 100% of the time.
And entertaining them too. Well, I think that's all we have time for. Any other last minute questions? I think we have a couple more minutes. I just really want to send a message out to the new filmmakers out there. I hope you've learned a little bit from the past, what we've discussed. So take the medium and do something new, because we love new, innovative things. That I think everybody up here, one thing we have in common, and everyone out there too, we love this format. We always have, we always will. The new things that come out and the innovative things for the filmmaking and the theater design we love. So keep it going, everybody. Thank you.
I want to